Well, thank you, Imran. Well, we have two very strong and engaged personalities with us today. And I'm conscious that we have a room full of smart, engaged people too. So I want to test Katharine's proposition that fashion hates Brexit. So can I ask, put up your hand if you think Brexit is a bad idea. Yeah, okay, all right. And put up your hand if you think a second referendum is a good idea. People's vote, some people say. All right, fair enough. Get off the fence, room. Okay, so let's kick off. Katharine, why don't you tell us, why you feel so strongly about this topic? There's so much, you have campaigned on in the past, so much you could be campaigning on right now. Why this in this moment?
Well, first of all, I cannot find a single good reason for Brexit. I mean, hands up if anybody can think of one. Economically, socially, culturally, agriculture, education, it just goes on and on. It's a complete disaster. Second thing is I think that the referendum we had was deeply flawed. I can't understand how it wasn't contested by a judge, lawyer, even the EU itself. Because, for instance, expats, there's about varying figures, 1.5 to 1.8 million, weren't allowed to vote. They're the first ones in line to be hit by any changes in health care provision. I mean, somebody said, their healthcare is EasyJet. People were lied to, there was no information, and I think a lot of people, somehow the whole thing seemed to be rushed through, regardless of, all the dodgy stories about leave and, Russian interference, Aaron Banks, you name it, it's going on and on and on, trundling on and on. Regardless of that, I don't think it was democratic, and I think that we deserve, the importance of this is so huge, it'll affect us for eternity, that we should have a proper referendum on it with everybody allowed to vote. And I think we have, Theresa May's deal, no deal, or Remain have got to be on the table as options. And anybody who'd like a second referendum now T-shirt, put up their hands and I'll chuck them to you.
So, Shahmir, while the room's getting free clobber...
Being a bit unfair on the front row.
You have to compete with that.
I don't have anything to give you guys, sorry.
Maybe your jacket you could throw. So, you voted Leave in the referendum.
Yeah.
Katharine said, I can't name one good thing. How many have you got then? I can't name one...
got three left.
You can't name one good thing about leaving.
Whoops. All gone.
Oh, we done?
Okay.
Sorry.
Right.
Yeah.
We'll obviously talk about the journey you've been on, but tell us back then, why were you in the sort of Leave camp and involved with the Leave campaign? What was the thinking?
So I got involved with Vote Leave early in the year 2016, and I was interested in politics in general. I had just come out of university, and I was trying to find a job. So I was like, you know what? I hit up Christopher Wiley, who was a good friend of mine, and I said, yo, can you introduce me to someone in politics? And so he connected me to someone who was working the Leave campaign. I am a Eurosceptic.
Right, so you were already Eurosceptic.
Yes, but I think...
And why? Why were you?
So there's a variety of reasons that there is a big pool of Eurosceptics that aren't your signature racist white dude that hates Muslims and anyone that isn't English. There are a variety of... The European Union isn't perfect. And I don't want to go into details about that because today isn't really about that, but as a Pakistani immigrant to Britain, there are a variety of reasons why someone who is from a former colony doesn't identify as a European. And so there is this feeling of being left behind for a lot of diaspora communities. So when I worked with, when I was volunteering at Vote Leave, I was working mainly with liberals, progressives, as well as people of color, because that is where my focus has always been, on social justice and people of color. So it wasn't about anything other than a sort of a cultural sort of feeling of being left out
Yeah.
as someone who wasn't European.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of nuance, and I don't want to go into details
yeah,
about that
yeah.
today. So, but if you want to ask me afterwards, feel free to.
It's interesting. I mean, the question we've been set, the essay section, where do we go from here, is obviously a very broad question. I wonder, Shahmir, I might ask you. A lot of the focus about where do we go from here has been on the UK, understandably. You know, we're here. This is where the debate is. But you saying there about coming from an immigrant background, diaspora background, feeling perhaps excluded from the EU, or it's interesting, isn't it? I think when Britain leaves, if Britain leaves, there will be no MEPs of colour left at all. The only MEPs in Brussels who are from immigrant backgrounds are the British ones.
Yeah.
So there will be a consequence, won't there?
No, of course.
For
And
Europe as much as.
I think there's different. Brexit isn't just one simple concept. What the Conservatives want with Brexit is a totally shambled, rooted in sort of a chaotic, a chaos for Britain. And I've sort of talked about this a lot in the past few months. Is Brexit was an opportunity for a very select few people to stir chaos so that they could themselves profit of it. And when you look at the things that have happened in order to have Brexit, the referendum itself was not democratic because it was won by the breaking of law. Every sort of, we can talk about what the messaging was, it was bad and whatnot, but at the core of this entire thing is that Brexit was won through illegal means, is that the referendum was won by cheating the system. And when you look at the investigations that have gone on post-Brexit, post the referendum, both Christopher's revelations as well as my revelations have shown that it's bigger than just people within Vote Leave cheating. It involves Russia, it involves billionaires, it involves a coordinated misinformation campaign, and it involves Cambridge Analytica, AIQ, and a plethora of organizations that are not from Britain and that have their own vested interests within Brexit.
Catherine, I wonder, you've, as you will all know, Catherine, over the years, has been on the right side of so many causes on, Iraq, climate change, sweatshops, and so on. How do you think campaigners move forward from here? Right now it's all a big parliamentary clusterfuck. How do you, and we've seen activists on the streets, but what do you think people need to be doing in the next weeks, months to get this issue where you want it to go?
Well, I think, T-shirts are great, marches are great, but unless you actually follow them up with political action, which means holding your elected representatives to account. Jeremy Corbyn, who probably everybody hates, said, a true thing, the only thing that changes politicians' behaviour is something that threatens their ability to get re-elected.
Yeah.
And I think this is what we actually have to do, and we have to not only write to MPs, you can put it right on the computer, print it off, but you put it in a hand-addressed envelope because it's easy to block emails. But any hand-addressed envelope, the stamp on it, you've got to open. So they've got to look at that. But the other thing, I think even more powerful, is finding out when their surgeries are and show-ups en masse across the country. We have show-up because MPs can't be trusted to vote with their constituents. They regard themselves as, above that they're, empowered to take decisions on our behalf rather than represent our views. Look what happened with Iraq. I mean, 90% of people polled by the BBC were against the invasion of Iraq without a second UN resolution. And look what happened. They voted for it. So don't trust them. And this is too important to stay at home and watch telly or put your feet up. We've got to get up and get out there and show up at the MP surgeries between now and the 11th and say, look, these are our views. You want to vote, that we want you to vote this thing down. And if you don't, you can watch, we'll be watching how you vote. And we're not voting for you next time, period. We'll find somebody else who does represent our views. And this is the only thing that will really be effective. Everything else is like nice and, we have loads of people walking, but they ignore us. They're arrogant. They ignore us. We completely lost control. of our democracy, whatever you call it. I mean, it's halfway between sort of a feudal state and a direct democracy. I mean, ultimately, we should do this, call our political representatives to account, but then start working on devolving towards direct democracy. You know, participatory democracy where we don't really need politicians anymore. We can, you know, if you can transfer money on your phone, you can vote. You know, we could vote on our phones and we should be voting on everything. Anyway, that, in a nutshell, is the way I think that we should take it forward. But we have to do this. Otherwise, we have too much to lose. Otherwise, it's a catastrophe.
Yeah. Shahmir, can I ask you... It is now, you know, thanks to campaigners like Katharine, thanks to, you know, politicians cocking things up maybe, a second referendum really is sort of hoving into view as a distinct possibility, as a way of breaking a logjam in Parliament. Tell us how you would sort of vote and how you think the country should vote. You know, you were Leave, you blew the whistle on the campaign for wrongdoing. Where are you now on this? Where do you think we should go?
To be honest, over the past few months, my focus is no longer on what happens with post the second referendum, whether it's Leave or Remain. For my focus has always been a democratic vote.
Right.
And I think that should be the focus of everyone is there are reasons for people to vote Leave. There are legitimate reasons for people to want to vote Leave. There are legitimate reasons for people to want to vote Remain. But in my opinion, that doesn't matter. Because institutionally, Britain has a problem. And I've always said this on every radio broadcast, TV show, TV program that I've gone on, is that if you think America is bad, culturally, politically, Britain is in a much bigger pile of shit.
Why do you think that?
Because culturally, Britain is cognitively dissonant to the institutional problems within it. America, at least Americans, you have a sort of retaliation to Trump, and you can see that with John was talking. Josh was talking about it. He called it the blue wave. In Britain, you can say that, okay, the people's vote is doing that, but not on that scale. Britain has always had a problem with recognizing its core issues, which are rooted in colonialism, imperialism, and white supremacy. You look at Brexit, and you look at the ideologies behind the leaders of this country, and they are rooted in something that is institutional. And people, particularly the British public, they love to protest, and they're very good at protesting, but they fail to recognize the institutional problems within it. And that comes down to education. Like, people in this country aren't taught that Britain's government and Britain itself has all its wealth from other countries. Like, it's sort of this, it's perverted as some sort of grandeur, great time where we had a working relationship with, like, India, you know? So recognizing our history is crucial to understanding the level of corruption within Britain. Otherwise, you wouldn't, in any other country, if someone was to out a gay Pakistani Muslim man, that person would be impeached, that person would be fired. But instead, in this country, not only does the government, the Prime Minister herself protect them, newspapers protect them, the BBC protects them. You have an institutional problem in this country, and no matter how many second referendums you have, if there isn't a full public inquiry into the entire shebang, Britain will continue down this spiral. Sorry, I know that's depressing.
No, you're right.
Katharine, one of the things I know you've been engaged with as well is thinking about the impact that Brexit could have on the fashion industry in particular. I know that will be of immense importance and interest to everyone in this room. Tell us a bit about, you know, why, over and above everything else, you think that's...
It's pretty catastrophic. I mean, if you're talking about UK manufacturing, 75% of our components are imported. The tragedy, really, of leaving Europe is that the EU's just signed a free trade deal with Japan, which gives it a population, this sort of a new economic free trade bloc, which we could be part of if we didn't leave, of 670 million. some sort of 550 EU and I think about 120, correct me if I'm wrong, from Japan. And these are the richest consumers in the world. I mean, fashion depends on Japan. The whole European fashion industry depends on Japan because they consume so much. They perceive made in the UK as a supreme mark of quality. So on the back of that, we could actually reinvent our fashion industry sustainably and produce beautiful English quality products, which they would hoover up. We've got 104,000 people at the moment employed in the clothing industry. 30 years ago, it was 1 million. It could go back to that. It created an enormous amount of jobs, enormous amount of tax for the exchequer, which could pay for hospitals, schools, etc. Fashion Roundtable, which is the thing I've joined recently because the British Fashion Council is so hopeless. The Fashion Roundtable actually got into Parliament. They're doing APPGs there, which is good. They're actually sort of in contact with power. I mean, trouble with the British Fashion Council is everybody thought it was a government body, but in actual fact, it's just a private company. Its only job is to make profit. And I just don't think they cross the channel because you see the things they do compared to the way the French, and it's just shaming. It's so bad. But anyway, Fashion Roundtable did a poll on the clothing industry, and I'm afraid I've lost my notebook somewhere in the grounds of it. It's a black A4 notebook, shiny, with loads of terrible drawings in it. It's mine. Please could I have it back?
Don't put it on
But
eBay.
I got my
Give
notes,
it back to...
my notes in there. And I think it was something like 96% of fashion insiders, and that means people who are quite senior who own businesses in the industry, if there was a second referendum now, would vote Remain. 80% of the clothing industry thinks leaving the single market will be bad for business. But then you've got to look at freedom of movement, which hugely impacts the fashion personnel. I mean, 70% of my staff are Italian. Most people would say at least 50% of their staff are EU citizens. They're all getting pretty depressed about it. And we need these people. Then you look at retail. Who's going to staff retail? I mean, retail is in a terrifying state. And then also the tariffs could be catastrophic. I mean, if you ship somebody like Selfridges, you have to deliver into this sort of car park system, and you're given a slot. Now, if there's any delay, if you're late for that slot, and you've got like about half an hour, it's unbelievable. You know, this is your delivery date, this is your delivery time. You miss it, you're back of the queue, you'll be given a slot a week or so later, they'll expect different amount, and it'll affect your payment terms. It'll be, a lorry pile-up of stuff holding up at customs could make you, half a day late, and huge impacts on your business. So, that's just a couple of the ways that it's going to affect it. How we ship into Europe, if we've got extra export duties. I mean, it's just heartbreaking, heartbreaking nightmare, the impact on this.
I'm conscious of time, and we literally could talk about this for, weeks, and probably will. But I want to ask you both, the title of this conversation is, where do we go from here? Can I ask you both to give us a prediction of how you think things are going to unfold in the next few weeks? Do you think there'll be a general election? Do you think there'll be a second referendum? All of the above? Do you think this deal will get voted through? Shahmir, you start. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, hopefully I'll find a job, so if anyone knows hiring.
Yeah, job in the fashion industry for this guy.
People don't hire whistleblowers. I think that it really, at this point in time, you can't tell and you don't know. But if you want a second referendum, then it is imperative that, especially for the British people here, it is imperative that you get out of this sort of complacent kind of attitude that is entrenched within us. Like, I've lived here 8 years, trust me, like, even I got it. Even I was like, okay, you know what, whatever, it'll fix itself. But you have to take that leap. Go to if you are the CEO, make a public statement. Get your press team and then tell them to release a statement saying, we support a second referendum. We want a second referendum and a public inquiry into what happened with Brexit. Because Britain is going down a path where the government is entirely corrupt. It is protecting criminals. It is protecting criminal activity. It isn't investigating proven Russian interference, and that's something to worry about. So take the initiative. I understand that it can harm your business, that it can have a bad effect on your business, especially if you have relationships with the government. But you know what else can sort of harm your business is that if you only have people of color. But it's not about your business, it's about cultural change. It's about how you can make a difference for the future. Otherwise, what's the point of having all this influence if you can't actually take the initiative to put a black man or a woman in a hijab in your adverts, and to only have black women in hijabs, or black trans women, or brown trans men, or actually make a statement saying, you know what, this government is wrong. Make those statements, and then you'll probably get a second referendum. And do it now, please.
Very good. Katharine?
Yeah, I'll be quick. So it's not just the CEO making a statement. The CEO and everybody has got to show up at MP's surgery, like in the next, 2 weeks? We have to all get down there and make our views felt. Ideally, May's Brexit deal is defeated. We have voted no confidence in the government. We extend Article 50. Labour gets in. We have a referendum with the 3 options on the table. Leave, remain, or no deal, because otherwise it'd be said to be undemocratic. And, we have a referendum and we see what happens. But please God, people realise it's a disaster for the UK, and we vote remain. But it's up to us. It's up to us now. We're rotted by comfort. We've been apathetic too long. Now, our future depends on it. We have to just get down there. You have to email your MP to find out when their surgery is. It's not actually published in the House of Commons. You've got to email them. You don't actually have to say why you want to know. You just want to know when and where it is. And then, because they'll say, we make an appointment, blah, blah, blah. You just get down there.
Well, there you go. Call to arms. Big thank you to Katharine Hamnett, Shahmir